Office chair rolls at a peak velocity of nearly 1 meter per second between workstations? That helps. But Dave also uses SDN Communications managed firewall services. Even IT pros up their game when they partner with SDN. Enjoy the uptime.
Missouri River Energy Services, a not-for-profit utility providing electricity and energy services to municipal utilities in South Dakota and throughout the region. More about Missouri River Energy Services at mrenergy.com.
Your Touchstone Energy Cooperative is more than just a building. Member owners like you influence how your cooperative impacts your life and your community. The power is in your hands. Learn more about the benefits of your co-op membership at yourcooppower.com.
I spent many nights wondering if I was going to live. Many nights wondering if my daughters were going to live. Because nothing else mattered to my trafficker. I was nothing but a source of income.
Don't you dare look in that camera and tell South Dakotans we don't have a problem. When we have legislators that are so rushing to pass this thing, that they don't care about how it appears to the people of South Dakota. Folks, my party decried how Obamacare was shoved down their throats. This is our Obamacare.
I'm actually quite offended that I have been told that I do the will and the bidding of the governor in the second floor. I'm offended by that statement.
You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
State House program funding provided by the South Dakota Bar Foundation, the educational and charitable arm of South Dakota lawyers and judges.
Human trafficking, revisions to technical education institutions, and the final debate on the bill to repeal initiated Measure 22. These were just a few of the issues state lawmakers tackled during their fourth week of the 2017 legislative session. Hello and welcome to State House, our weekly legislative review program. I'm Stephanie Rissler. We'll begin with the House of Representatives from Tuesday afternoon as lawmakers considered a concurrent resolution that recognizes pornography as a public health crisis. Here are the details.
We're here to talk about pornography for a few minutes. Not necessarily a fun topic of discussion, but I do believe it's an important one that we as legislators should take up. Our first duty as legislators, as the state, is to protect life. If we don't do that, nothing else that we do matters. And I believe this is an issue dealing with life. Pornography is destroying lives, and it is our duty to inform people of the dangers therein and to prevent lives, predominantly of our young men, from being ruined by this scourge. Time did a study called Porn and the Threat to Virility, in which the author writes, quote, "A growing number of young men are convinced that their sexual responses have been sabotaged because their brains were virtually marinated in porn when they were adolescents. Their generation has consumed explicit content in quantities and varieties never before possible, on devices designed to deliver content swiftly and privately, all at an age when their brains were more plastic, more prone to permanent damage than later in life. These young men feel like unwitting guinea pigs in a largely unmonitored, decade-long experiment in sexual conditioning. Pornography harms men, women, and children in ways that we are just now beginning to understand. The harm to women includes normalizing violence against women. 88% of mainstream pornographic films depict physical aggression. This aggression is overwhelmingly directed at women. In 95% of these aggressive actions, the women being filmed either respond positively or give no response. This sends a clear message that aggression against women is okay. We know it's not. Pornography sends a message that women are sexual objects whose purpose is to please men. Society's sexualization of girls can lead to eating disorders, low self-esteem, and depression. It idealizes pain, domination, and humiliation. It harms men. Pornography usage has been linked to higher scores of narcissism and psychopath scores. Men who view pornography are less likely to intervene if witnessing a rape, and they tend to show lower levels of empathy with rape victims. Viewing pornography can condition a man to want violence, shock, or the use of degrading actions. It harms our children. They become more likely to experiment with risky sexual behavior. With reasoning and emotional control not being fully developed in adolescence, it makes the already harmful effects of pornography more extreme and long-lasting in children. So it's clear pornography is causing harm to men, women, and children. It's shaping the narrative of our culture and affecting people's behavior in highly negative ways. Pornography is a public health crisis. It leads to a broad spectrum of individual and public health impacts and societal harms. This resolution is not intended to introduce legislation or result in any burden on the taxpayer in any way. It's simply to help educate our families of the dangers of pornography, and in doing so, we will be fulfilling our obligation to protect the lives of our citizens. This passed the Senate 35-0, so I would ask for your yes vote, and I hope for a 70-0 on this. Thank you.
The concurrent resolution passed 65-0. House members also considered House Bill 1056, a bill that will authorize law enforcement officers to issue certain citations not signed under oath.
Right now, if you get pulled over and a copper issues you a ticket, if it's a Class 2 misdemeanor, the officer on the bottom of the ticket signs this affirmation. I declare and affirm under the penalties of perjury that this complaint or summons has been examined by me, and to the best of my knowledge and belief is that all things are true and correct. And any person who signs this statement, knowing any statement to be false or untrue, in whole or in part, is guilty of perjury. So that kind of holds the officer accountable to make sure that the citation or summons they're issuing is truthful. Now that's for a Class 2. Right now, if the officer issues a Class 1 or a felony ticket like DUI 3, drops you off at the jail, the officer's now got that citation, and he or she has got to go find a notary. So there are agencies that have to employ notaries. In my agency, I happen to be one, so at the end of the day, we've got a stack of citations that we're notarizing and frankly kind of wasting time on. What this bill does is it allows that oath or affirmation that I read to be put on every citation, whether it's a misdemeanor or felony, so the officer, trooper, deputy, whomever, would just sign that oath and send this on its way right away to the city attorney or the state's attorney. So like I said, it kind of streamlines the system, less paperwork, keeps the officers out on the street instead of searching for a notary, especially like the Highway Patrol had testified in favor of this, and they have an issue with that in outlying areas within the state. You know, paperwork stacks up, and then they got to go try to find a notary. So I would ask you to vote yes on this. The Police Chiefs Association supports it. State's Attorney Association supports it. Department of Public Safety and Dan Kaiser supports it. So I'd ask for a yes vote. Thank you.
The measure passed 68-0. Across the hall in the full Senate, lawmakers took up Senate Bill 65, a proposed law that will establish the South Dakota Board of Technical Education and to revise certain provisions regarding career and technical education and post-secondary technical institutes. Senator Jim Bolin explained the merits of the bill.
Well, today I bring you Senate Bill 65, what some people might term the Tech School Liberation Bill. For too many years, since these institutions started in the mid-1960s in South Dakota, they have been under the control of local school boards and the State Board of Education, which has not proven to be a good functioning situation for the growth and development of these institutions. Workforce development is one of the most important things that this legislature needs to deal with and that all of state government needs to deal with. And to bring about effective workforce development, it has been worked on and brought forward to do something to try to change the governing structure of the tech schools of our state. And in this last election, 2016, Amendment R was passed. As a result of that, Senate Bill 65 is coming. It is a compromise piece of legislation that recognizes the needs of the institutions themselves, the 4 that we have in South Dakota, the needs of business and industry, the needs of the students, and the needs of the local communities that in many instances have put forward some of their own resources to build up these institutions as much as they can. I'm not going to talk for a long time today about the need for this particular bill. There's going to be other members of the Senate Education Committee who heard this bill last week, excuse me, that unanimously approved it and who I know want to add to some of the remarks that I'm going to make today. But I strongly urge you to support Senate Bill 65. This is the type of bill that's not really flashy, and it's not really, gets a lot of attention in the press. But this is the type of bill that will have a long-term, tremendous impact on the state of South Dakota and on workforce development. This is the guts of the stuff that we do in this legislature that oftentimes, and I'll just say this, perhaps doesn't get the attention that it oftentimes should.
15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago, I was on the chamber board in Sioux Falls when there were other good legislative leaders here trying to bring forward this very effort to match the technical schools in relationship to economic development in our state. But because of the need for a constitutional change to create this structure that you see before you in Senate Bill 65, we were not able to get the kind of momentum that we really thought we needed in workforce development for the great state of South Dakota. What I was most impressed in Senate Education was the incredible collaboration amongst multiple stakeholders to bring forward this bill that sits before you today, and the kind of good faith work to really look at a robust development of our technical schools, trying to meet the needs of where the state of South Dakota needs to go, and also the direct connection with those students that would be coming into the technical school education, so that we always assure moving forward into the future that we have a linkage between what's happening in our middle schools and high schools, technical school education development that would then link them with our technical schools. Additionally, we saw the great cooperation with the Board of Regents and looking at how there would be movement forward and further advancing of degrees for people that would choose technical schools for their education. This bill is a long time in coming, and so I would ask for your great, strong, affirmative support to move the state of South Dakota forward through Senate Bill 65. Thank you.
I too rise in support today on a personal level, because when we allow this to happen and to create this new board, they live it day to day. So they know what their tech school needs, they know what industry wants, they know what their community can support. And they also have that ability to then reach out to that future generation, the high school kids. Maybe they're going to do dual credit. Maybe we have some feeder high schools that could be part of this. And this board is going to allow them to grow and foster that level of student, so that maybe, by the time they graduate high school, they're already graduating a VOTEC school and ready to join our workforce. So I think this is a win-win for everybody in South Dakota. I urge your support. Wopila.
The measure passed 33-0. Wednesday morning, members of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee took public testimony on a bill that will require the name and telephone number of an organization fighting to end sex trafficking be given in writing to any woman seeking an abortion. Senator Stace Nelson asked the committee to approve an amendment that deletes social services and inserts health services into the bill. The committee approved the amendment and then went on to take public testimony on Senate Bill 102.
We've added this section because we do know that, unfortunately, a lot of these victims of sex trafficking are often forced to have abortions. And what this does is, by inserting this information and providing it to them, it is kind of a lifeline. These people are victims, and by inserting that information and providing that to them, we hope for them to be able to understand that. By interjecting in there, encouraging them to call 911, and also to call these organizations that will help get them out of the circumstances. One, if they're willing to come forward immediately and contact 911, because they are victims, we want to get them the assistance and the justice they deserve, and also that we as a government needs to do everything possible to ensure that we're protecting them. And if we cannot get them to come forward by dialing 911, we at least want them to have the information that there's other organizations out there that will provide them discreet assistance.
You always think that these kinds of things happen in the big city, and that's where I'm from. But for me, and for a lot of us, it doesn't just happen in the big cities, because to me, it happened here.
It's okay, just take your time.
It's always those that you think wouldn't do it. Because when it happened to me, he was a business owner. And at first, he was someone I dated. And then we were engaged. And I worked with him in his business until the day came where he told me that I needed to get up, cover up my ugly. And he drove me somewhere, and I didn't quite know what was going on. It's in the middle of the night, and it's winter. So I got up and I got dressed, and he took me to a hotel. And he told me what room to go to. And with the slamming of the car door, my boyfriend became my trafficker. I would beg that I didn't want to go. So he started taking me and taking the pictures for the ads. And I would beg. And the more I begged, the more violent the situation became. He took me across the state of South Dakota and all the little cities that we all think are safe. He's there. They're all there because they take pictures of us in hotel rooms, in beds, to sell us. And anytime I showed signs where I wanted to leave or tried to leave, things became even more violent. And he would threaten things, at first in the beginning, that he would harm himself. I performed CPR for 47 minutes until rescue team had gotten to the Hell House, where I lived for 2 years. I had 2 daughters that lived with us. One of them was pregnant. I had the chance and the time, many times, to go into clinics with my daughter. He was trying to force us to get rid of this baby. I truly believe that at any time that somebody had said something to us, we would have known. Later, as he started taking me to other states throughout the Midwest, I started taking pictures of every billboard and every poster. And I waited for the time that I could call. I spent many nights wondering if I was going to live. Many nights wondering if my daughters were going to live. Because nothing else mattered to my trafficker. I was nothing but a source of income. A source of income that he would display like I was a trophy at his day job. And I was his slave at night. I'm asking South Dakota to make today our Independence Day. I don't know if I will ever get the chance to step into a courtroom of any kind with my trafficker. But with all your help, every day will be my day in court. Thank you.
I had no idea, the emotion that would be involved with the testimony, and I want to thank you for coming forward, sharing your story. It's terribly courageous of you to do that, and words on a piece of paper are just words, but you brought it to life, and I can't express enough how important and imperative it is that we pass this bill. So thank you.
The measure received a due pass recommendation and passed out of committee as amended on a unanimous vote of 6-0. By the afternoon, members of the full House listened to Representative Don Hagar of Sioux Falls explain a concurrent resolution that urges Congress to conduct an audit of Indian Health Services. Here are the highlights.
There are, depending on how you define it, nearly 100,000 Native Americans that live within our borders. And Indian Health Services has been tasked by the federal government by treaty they have an obligation to provide health care to our Native population. By almost any measure, they are failing miserably. So here's the thing. We know that they've failed, and so one of the things that's being suggested this is what I'm going to encourage, and I think I have the support of our federal representatives as well, that we have a full and complete audit which identifies shortfalls and recommends solutions as a necessary first step in addressing some of the critical financial and quality issues at the Indian Health Services Agency. I can tell you specifically, Senator Rounds believes that any proposed changes to IHS stemming from the audit must be made in consultation with the tribes. I will also tell you that this resolution largely mirrors what the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association passed in April of 2016. So we are really, by passage of this resolution, in lockstep with the tribal leadership of the 9 tribes within our state boundaries. I can also tell you the Indian Health Services, to our knowledge, has never been systematically audited or analyzed. It's never happened. And I would also add that current acting Health and Human Services Deputy Secretary Mary Wakefield mentioned in a June 2016 hearing, that she and HHS would welcome an audit. So they're certainly open to it. Now, here's part of the problems that we've run into so far with the Indian Health Services. There's no real funding formula. Regional allocations aren't made based on the number of people receiving health care, or regional user population growth, or types of services, or any other logic or rationale, as near as anyone can determine. So that's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. Let's create a systematic process. Secondly, there are no consistent qualitative measurements. How do they know if they're doing a good job? They don't have any measures. The most recent qualitative information is from 2008. It's 8 years old. And so IHS management really doesn't know if their people are delivering quality health care. The federal government, I'll just give you an illustration here. The federal government spends nearly $2,000 per person more on a federal inmate's health care than an IHS beneficiary. So even a federal inmate receives more money than our native brothers and sisters. I think there's an injustice here that needs to be addressed.
Susan Hospital in Rapid City shut down their emergency room, so they're sent over to Rapid City Regional. It's costing Rapid City Regional $500,000 a day just because Indian Health Services sends all their patients to there. That's $500,000 a day. That's not sustainable. Rapid City Regional can't pass that on to their other non-Indian customers and stay. I mean, it's impossible. It's eventually going to shut down Rapid City Regional because this is a big injustice on the federal government.
The concurrent resolution passed 68-0. Across the hall, the full Senate debated House Bill 1069. The measure brought the session to repeal initiated Measure 22, which was approved by the voters this past November. Here are the highlights.
I can think of very few other questions that have been addressed in either the Senate or the House that have received the amount of attention that House Bill 1069 has received since the necessity for 1069 originated by the passage of Initiated Measure 22 last November. The only thing that comes to mind is perhaps the sales tax increase from last year, and I would tell you that from my estimation, the amount of messaging, marketing, advertising, constituent engagement, and discussion among members of the Senate and the House has exceeded any that I can remember in my legislative service. I want to commend everybody on engaging in that process and talk about how constructive, informative, and passionate those discussions have been. It's really been a privilege to be a part of it, to hear so many diverse opinions, so many ways to fix the problems that we think exist with this particular law, our campaign finance system in general, the reporting requirements, government oversight, accountability, and any myriad of questions that have been discussed. And I would hope that as we consider the merits or lack thereof for House Bill 1069 today, that we would keep in mind that this is a body of respect for each other and decorum and process. The reason we have as a Constitution is so that we can measure law against a standard. Certainly our framers understood this. That's why they wrote the Constitution to begin with. If we didn't have a Constitution to refer to, if we didn't have a guidebook, it would be mob rule. If you read the Federalist Papers, it's clearly delineated there. Constitution exists to protect the interests of the minority from the tyranny of the majority.
I did not like IM-22. I spoke against it because the problems we have in this state government, the solution to bad government is not more government. And that's exactly what IM-22 was. But we had an initiated measure. The voters of South Dakota spoke. Now, to that end, before IM-22 got on a ballot, I read to you earlier about our constitutional officers' responsibility to protect the people of South Dakota and the Constitution. You have to ask yourself at this point, If the governor's office, if the Secretary of State's office, and the Attorney General's office perceived IM-22 as unconstitutional, then why did they not take their duty and take it to court before it got on the ballot? That's a very important point. Because now we have a lot of legislators saying, well, we have to protect the people of South Dakota from their own ignorance of passing IM-22 with its unconstitutional provisions. The problem with that premise, and I wholeheartedly agree with my dear friend from Sioux Falls, is the Constitution is there to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority, the government. It is not your Constitution. You are the government. We are the government. That Constitution is the sole ownership of the people of this great state. So when we tell them that we're doing this to protect them, after we just got done voting down an amendment that had Supreme Court rulings say that there's unconstitutional provisions in this, yeah, we can't say that to them. Early on in session, I beseeched my colleagues, I begged you, bring this in a constitutionally sound fashion. Do it in a slow and respectful fashion. Multi-subject omnibus bills are unconstitutional. Matter of fact, 17 of you, my dear colleagues, put in your lawsuit to overturn IM-22 in Section 10 that IM-22 was unconstitutional because it violated our single subject provisions of our state constitution. And now you bring the mirror image of IM-22 to repeal it with the same unconstitutionality that you swore in a court of law was there. We're telling South Dakotans that we don't have corruption here and that their concerns in enacting this initiated measure were unwarranted. When we had EB-5, where people ended up dead because of corruption in state government, when we have Gear Up, where a whole family died because of unchecked corruption in the state of South Dakota, when we have legislators voting to protect legislators that violated the rules of this body for 2 years and preying on interns and pages, don't you dare look in that camera and tell South Dakotans we don't have a problem. When we have legislators that are so rushing to pass this thing that they don't care about how it appears to the people of South Dakota. Folks, my party decried how Obamacare was shoved down their throats. This is our Obamacare.
With the majority of people who are going to vote for this bill, a lawsuit is going to go away that they initiated. They're plaintiffs in it. And, you know, I did my best to try and dissuade everybody from going down this route. And I knew that there are a lot of good people here that I think got talked into this early on, frankly, by the second floor. And they are, in their own minds, I've watched, since I've been in the legislature, this herd mentality. And that's probably what scares me most about what's going on today. And that is that before the session started, the governor's office must have hatched this scheme to sue on IM-22. And they got some folks committed to it early, before I think that they had an opportunity to really think through the ramifications of what they were doing. And my concern is that then they were committed. And then they became committed to getting rid of the process or the lawsuit by making it moot, by passing a bill here in this legislature. And by the way, this is for the record, I make this speech as a legislative history. And the reason I do that is because I believe that this is a foregone conclusion, what's going to happen here today. And with that said, we've got a lot of good people that were talked into something, and then they had a pecuniary interest or a money interest in making sure that the lawsuit goes away. But what you're doing is reflecting on this institution. Not just you, but on this institution and this government. The people of this state, up until a few years ago, they may not have trusted Washington, but they trusted Pierre. And now we're getting to the point where they're not even trusting Pierre.
We've already heard that we don't get stacks of cash, we don't get gold watches, we don't get elaborate trips on taxpayer dollars. That's just doesn't happen here. I've been the face in the Argus Leader being told that I'm a corrupt individual and that I just cannot be helped, and God help me and God save me because I'm an awful, terrible person. Based on the previous speakers, you would imagine that that is the case. However, I want to remind this body the reason why we're doing it. The reason why is because we need to protect this institution. We need to protect the state of South Dakota. We took an oath on the first day to uphold the Constitution. You are correct, my kind sir behind me, that it has not officially been ruled by a court. However, if you read the Constitution, it quite plainly says in Article 12, Section 2 or 3, that only the Appropriations Committee can appropriate dollars. That is true. So that's black and white. It hasn't been ruled on, but it's pretty black and white. But because I don't disagree with all of the parts of IM-22. I disagree with one piece, predominantly one piece. It is this institution's role within government. It's our Appropriations Committee that holds the purse strings. This is the body's checks and balances of state government. We are not the executive branch. I'm actually quite offended that I have been told that I do the will and the bidding of the governor in the second floor. I'm offended by that statement. But we are the legislative branch. We hold the purse strings to the state's general fund budget. That is our duty. That is given to us by the South Dakota Constitution. That's our job. I've sat on appropriations 10 out of 12 years. This is now my 11th year serving on appropriations, 4 of which I was chair. That is a very serious job that we take every day. You have members that are sitting on this floor. We listen, we learn, we decide, we help make decisions together. We take input from the public, from the people in the gallery. We take opinions, we try to make it work, and we balance the state's budget. That's our constitutional duty. That didn't happen in IM-22, and that right was taken away from us. There are things in IM-22. It only appropriated $4.9 million. It caps it at $12 million. Parts of IM-22 talk about everybody's going to get democracy credits. You get 2 $50 democracy credits. That's wonderful. Do you know how many registered voters there are in the state of South Dakota? 540,000 approximately. $4.9 million only funds about 10% of those people. So which group gets to spend the money? The top 10%, the wealthy? The bottom 10%, the poor? How do we choose who gets to spend the money? Initiative Measure 22 didn't give us that guideline. It is my opinion, and the reason I am supporting this is there are pieces in the current law that was adjoined, I agree. Not the most perfect system, but it happened. So, what do? Let's start from scratch. Let's figure out the pieces we can do. Let's figure out how much money we have, and do what we were sent here to do. Balance the state's budget using the general funds that we have. And with that, I would ask you to vote yes on 1069, and let's get back to business and do what we do best in the next 20 days that we have left and balance our budget.
And sir, at this time, in order to protect the reputation of this body and some of its esteemed members from rightful or aptly labeled charges of corruption, I would, at this point, I would ask you to enact Joint Rule 12.1, as well as the rules in the Manual of Legislative Procedures for Masons, Section 521, paragraphs 2 and 3, and extend the appropriate respectful courtesy to my colleagues who have been identified as having this conflict of interest in a personally seeing the results of this legislation pass as a result of their involvement in a public recorded lawsuit to be excused from the Senate floor so they do not have to embarrass themselves or this body by engaging in a conflict of interest. Thank you, sir.
Let me start with 12.1 because Masons applies only if there isn't a definitive ruling, God bless you, capable within 12.1. 12.1 again is a rule as it relates to individual ability to vote or not. I rule that point of order not in order and correct because those are individual points of order, much like you may or others may decide to pass by virtue of other things. So therefore, you have the ability then to appeal my ruling, but I rule that your point of order is not appropriate at this time.
Mr. President, there are 27 yeas, 8 nays.
House Bill 1069, having received a 2/3 majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Senator.
The measure passed out of the full Senate 27-8. By Thursday, Governor Dugard had signed the bill into law. To watch or listen to any of the debates on House Bill 1069, they've all been archived at sd.net. Thursday morning, the Senate Education Committee took up Senate Bill 125, a measure to revise the list of organizations that may approve and accredit a non-public school. Here's more.
As you know, in my district, we have numerous tribal schools. Now, through the process with tribal schools and the Department of Ed, they have worked out an alternate certification program, accreditation program that fits more in line with what tribal schools are doing and seeing. And that work has already been done between the tribal ed directors and the Department of Ed. And they were able to do that through rule. Well, in finding this, the only place in statute that we had to add something was as it deals with the High School Activities Association, because in their bylaws you have to be an accredited school, and in this statute it lists the accreditation place where you are accredited. So our tribal schools will now, some of them will become COSA accredited, and that's the Commission for Oceti Sakowin Accreditation. Now, I can tell you that that was an intense project. Their accreditation isn't a whole lot different than what we do in our public schools right now, but it does have that tribal emphasis. We needed to add the COSA accreditation into the High School Activities Association so that those tribal schools will still be eligible to play basketball, be in debate, and do everything that they've always done as part of our state, but we needed to add this in statute.
The measure passed 7-0. Also discussed in committee a measure to provide for the referral of a school board's decision to change the number of school days in a school week. Here are the details.
Senate Bill 112 is fairly simple, and it's something that I brought forward as somewhat of a compromise to some concerns from constituents about a school board's decision to have a 4 or 5 day school week. Originally, the request from constituents was to allow the public to simply bring a referral of a school board's decision. I decided that we have local school boards for a reason, that they maintain local control and they are elected to do that job. So the compromise that I bring before you is to allow a school board, once they make a decision on a 4 or 5 day week, if they decide that their public is split and they want to know what the public vote is, they can pass a resolution to allow the public to vote on their decision.
So what's the downside of this bill? I don't think it has one. Some opponents may come up here and argue that this might be a slippery slope. Once you add one more tool to the toolbox, then boards will be sending every vote to the voters in doing this. That's not true. Boards are very careful about their decisions. They work with their administrators very carefully. They take these kind of decisions very carefully. And in many cases, you know, they've had these conversations with their communities. Today, as we speak, we have 34 school districts that have 4-day school weeks. And that's fine. Those decisions have been made by the board, but they've not been referred. So this gives an option to do that.
A referral is not necessary. It's already in place, ladies and gentlemen. It's called school board elections. And I'll refer back to testimony by Mr. Sherman Monroe, a former colleague of mine, though he may not remember it, but we'll talk afterwards. Absolutely. People run for school boards for numbers of reasons that they think they can come in and change a system. They're more than likely getting misinformed out in the community, and once they get involved in talking to the people who make those decisions and listen to the people who have boots on the ground and are doing the job day after day, they do have a change of heart and a change of mind because they get the facts and not just the stories. If people aren't happy with decisions that school board members make or you as legislators make, the referral process is they vote you out. Someone new is voted in to carry out the will of the people. Now, prior to these big decisions being made, such as moving to a 4-day school week or going back to a 5-day school week, there are all kinds of meetings that are held. There are public notices put out. There are surveys that are done. In fact, in one of the communities that Senator Sutton represents, there was big discussion on changing school days. And I will tell you that the administration in those school districts where these happen do extensive research. This isn't just a decision that is made at a school board meeting on Monday night when everyone shows up and says, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's go to a 4-day school week, and they vote on it. That certainly isn't how this process happens. In that particular community, 76% of the responses approved of the change that was being made. 10 to 12% really didn't have an opinion on it. So more than 80% of the people said, we're either in favor of this or we have no opinion. So what decision should be referred? As my colleague, Dr. Pogany, who I assure you on the next educational bill, I'll get him in line and we'll be on the same sheet of music. But he said, let's not go down the slippery slope. And I ask you, what decision should we start referring? Is that slippery slope? We can't decide whether or not this teacher should come back this year, so let's let the people decide. Let's refer it to them. What about the athletic calendars? Should they also be decided by the people? And let's not forget about the all-important thing that more administrators and school boards hear about than anything is the school lunch menu. Should that be referred as well? So I stand here today on behalf of the school administrators of South Dakota, and I ask you to oppose Senate Bill 112.
My question is that the board refers this measure to the public, and the public then votes. Is the board legally bound to follow that decision of the voters, or is it still free to go a different way? So my question is the vote of the public, once it's been canvassed and certified, is it legally binding on the school board?
I would say, Mr. Chair, that the school board could potentially go against the will of the voters at a future vote, even if the voters put that in place. Would be my understanding that at some future date that the school board could decide to vote to have a 4 or 5 day school week different than what the voters did, but I don't know if that would be advisable.
The main sponsor of the bill, Senator Billy Sutton, asked the committee to defer final action on the measure to allow him time to craft an amendment that addresses some concerns within the bill. Committee members agreed and are expected to take up the amendment and final action on Senate Bill 112 during their next meeting. At the end of each week, legislative leaders take some time to visit with the media. Here are some edited highlights from the Democrats' press briefing.
It's incredibly disappointing to see the will of the voters overturned. In 7 business days, we wiped out the vote of 180,580 people in our state. And to me, that is unacceptable. The voters did what the politicians were unwilling to do in passing IM-22. We should have addressed this for the last several years as it relates to transparency and corruption and ethics in government. In fact, we've brought measures every year for the last several years to implement an ethics commission, to reform campaign finance, to have a more open and transparent government. And it was scoffed at. It was the legislature thumbed its nose at those measures, and they were defeated on party line votes. So it's just incredibly disappointing for the voters to speak and then to watch us thumb our nose at them as well.
There's 3 big criteria that we think need to be met going forward here to meet the intent of the people. One is the government accountability. People want an accountable government. And we have, Karin Soley had introduced 1076. As leadership from both sides signed on to it, and actually Senator Greenfield is priming it on the Senate side. That bill goes a long way to answering the questions what the government accountability didn't do in IM-22, the funding of it, who was under and all that, but it still keeps the teeth in it. And our intent is to make sure that bill goes through and not get watered down. The second portion that people want is lobbyist limitations. I think that's been pretty well shot across the board. Representative Mickelson has 1073, which I've signed on to and Billy signed on to, and I consider it a bipartisan bill. That bill is important that we get through. Right now, we're the Wild Wild West in South Dakota. We have no limitations on lobbyists. And I am not saying that it's running rampant up here, that was the big argument, well, we don't have gold watches and we're not taking trips. But we don't have any laws and limitations. And so that bill needs to get passed. The other one is the campaign finance reform and the Campaign Ethics Commission discussion. And that the Secretary of State is bringing the bills, Senate Bill 53 and Senate Bill 54. And we support those bills. Those 3 bills, I think, would go a long ways to honoring the intent of the people. And our focus is to make sure those get passed in a bipartisan mode and that they just don't water them down to be do-nothing bills.
The Republicans also took some time for their end-of-the-week press briefing and to answer some questions from the media. Here are some of their highlights.
The discussion of 1069 to its eventual conclusion was one of the most robust legislative debates that I've been privileged to be a part of since I've been in elected office, and it was a pleasure to be involved in it. And I thought both proponents and opponents to 1069 handled themselves with the kind of decorum we would expect in a sometimes emotionally charged debate. But at the end of the day, as I suggested, we concluded the debate colleagues and with a commitment to move forward with legislation that's in the best interest of the people that reside in our state. So we're happy with the process. I think the voters should continue to hold us accountable for what we produce from this point forward, and I believe that they'll do so. I hope that the folks that were so engaged in trying to prevent the repeal of 1069 would stay engaged so that we may continue to hear their voices as we move forward with replacement legislation that addresses the issues that they were so concerned about. Sometimes the absence of input is taken as permission, and we want to make sure that we're responding in an appropriate fashion to the concerns of our constituency. So our hope is that we continue to hear from the voters that sent us here to do the people's work.
Governor Dennis Daugaard also visited with the media. Here are some clips from his meeting.
To suggest that bags of money are being handed over, or gold watches, or $1 million, or wholly paid vacations. Again, I'm greatly offended by that sort of misleading advertising. And in as much as some people say shame on, or suggest people should feel shame for repealing this unconstitutional measure, I say shame on the proponents for misleading the voters and implying gross improprieties for which they can identify not a single fact pattern, not one. Greater disclosure is always good. So to the extent that some supporters of ballot measures or dollars contributed to PACs that in turn do not disclose when they in turn make gifts what the source of those dollars are, I would be very supportive of greater transparency in the detailing of the origin of gifts. And if they pass through multiple entities, then force the transparency through as well. Campaign finance limitations, that is an arbitrary thing. What those limitations should be, IM22 adjusted some of those. Some of those limitations I'm perfectly open to relooking at, taking a new look at. I don't know that there's a perfect answer on any front. If there's some magic number, I don't know who can identify it. Whatever number is chosen is going to be somewhat arbitrary. But the Ethics Committee really, if you look at the terms of IM22, didn't do a lot more than investigate and then turn things over to the Secretary of State and Attorney General. And that's the way ethics issues are dealt with today. The complaints are addressed directly to the Secretary of State or directly to the Attorney General. And maybe they need more resources, maybe they need more investigative research resources or enforcement tools. And to that extent, maybe those are items that could be addressed.
If you would like to watch the end of the week press briefings in their entirety, they have been archived at sd.net. There you can find all kinds of resources to keep you on top of everything happening during this year's legislative session, including gavel-to-gavel coverage of House and Senate floor debates, plus archived files on all of the bills introduced this session. And that will wrap up this edition of State House. On behalf of everyone with South Dakota Public Broadcasting, thanks for watching.
State House program funding provided by the South Dakota Bar Foundation, the educational and charitable arm of South Dakota lawyers and judges. Your membership supports great programs, along with help from Missouri River Energy Services, a not-for-profit utility providing electricity and energy services to municipal utilities in South Dakota and throughout the region. More about Missouri River Energy Services at mrenergy.com.
Advanced Handwork and SDN's vast network help Tony execute secure information exchanges with colleagues around the globe. Even IT pros up their game when they partner with SDN. Enjoy the uptime.
The Bush Foundation, investing in great ideas and the people who power them in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. BushFoundation.org.
The Mostly Mozart Festival celebrates its 50th anniversary with both a look back and a look ahead, including signature performances of Mozart's first